Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale, the headlines. NATO military chief says tanks are important for Ukraine to match its enemies. And Polish Prime Minister is pessimistic about German permission for Leopard tank transfer as analysts attribute Olaf Scholz's hesitancy to fear of nuclear war. And former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev reacts to ongoing support of Ukraine, warning of the possibility of nuclear war if Russia faces defeat. We start off in Brussels, where a senior NATO military commander, General Christopher Cavori, says tanks are important for Ukraine to be a match for Russia. Amidst protracted discussions along Western allies over whether to supply German-made Leopard tanks to Kiev. He adds that Western technology was outperforming Russian technology in the war, but cautioned that tanks alone were not the solution.
In a war like it is being fought.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he is expecting strong decisions when dozens of defense ministers meet at an airbase in Germany today. In his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky says Ukraine is expecting a powerful military aid package from the U.S. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization and defense leaders from roughly 50 countries will confer at the Ramstein Air Base, the latest in a series of meetings since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 11 months ago. The focus is expected to be not on what the United States will provide, but on whether Germany will send its Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine, or at least approve their transfer from third world countries. Meanwhile, Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said he was moderately optimistic about Germans giving other countries permission to re-export their Leopard tanks to Ukraine, fearing whether winter will give Russian forces time to regroup and unleash a major attack. Ukraine is pushing for the Leopard battle tanks, which are held by an array of NATO nations, but whose transfer to Ukraine requires Germany's approval. Poland and Finland have already said they would send the tanks if Germany lifts its veto. In a sign of mounting frustration, Poland has suggested it might do so even if Germany tries to block it. Military analyst and former Austrian Defense Ministry official Gustav Gressel says enormous fear of a nuclear war is the reason why Germany's chancellor has so far blocked allies from sending its Leopard 2 tanks. A German government source said Berlin would lift its objections if Washington sends its own Abrams tanks, but U.S. officials have said they have no plans yet to do so.
The Chancellery is enormously afraid of nuclear war, and they're perceived they're the prime target for that. I don't know how this strange perception is carrying about. It sometimes I have a bit of the impression that Scholz has lost sight of the fact that Germany is actually part of NATO alliance. I mean, he's mentally not westbound. It was basically obvious from March that Ukraine sooner or later would need Western-style battle tanks, because logistical issues, ammunition issues will become more complicated the longer the war protracts. And this was a long war, and it was very obvious that it will be a long war. Now we have wasted roughly 10 months with endless debates, and we're still there. I'd say that the capability gap between Eastern and Western tanks, especially if you talk about elderly Leopard 2, Leopard 2 versions, is not that big, but the logistical difference it makes in terms of ammunition supply, supply for spare parts, is considerable.
And U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has met with German officials at Berlin's Chancellery a day ahead of the leaders of a defense meeting at Germany's Ramstein U.S. Air Force Base. Billions of dollars worth of military aid is expected to be pledged at that meeting, billed as a chance for the West to give Ukraine what it needs to defeat Russia this year. Countries including Canada, the Netherlands, and Sweden have already announced armored vehicles and air defenses will go to Ukraine. But the big question will be whether the meeting brings heavy tanks, which Kiev says it needs to fend off Russian assaults and recapture its occupied land. A Canadian company supplying battle-ready armored vehicles to Ukraine plans to deliver the 200 vehicles Ottawa promised to Kiev before summer, and that's according to the firm's chief executive officer, Roman Shimonov. Ontario-based Rushel Inc. builds armored vehicles for government and commercial organizations, including the U.S. State Department and the National Aeronautical and Space Administration, NASA.
Following these 8 vehicles, we received many orders, hundreds of vehicles already on the ground, and hundreds more will arrive very soon. We plan to deliver additional 200 vehicles that were published just recently in the next few months before summer. So I won't be able to share the information of how long does it take to get it into Ukraine, but we have a very sophisticated logistic supply chain that will allow us to bring it as soon as possible to Ukraine.
And yet more military aid to Ukraine, and this time is coming from Estonia. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur said the country will send military equipment to Kiev worth some 113 million euros in its latest package of support for the war against Russia.
Ukraine needs most is heavy weaponry to hold the initiative and stand against Russia, who is currently making efforts to regain its military strength. Our estimate is that the hardest battles are still ahead. Estonian government has just today decided to support Ukraine with the biggest military aid package to date, worth of 113 million euros. Its centerpiece are FH-70 155mm howitzers, just behind me, you can see them. But the package also consists of 122mm howitzers, grenade launchers, vehicles, and a considerable amount of artillery and other ammunition.
I would like to state that Lithuania fully supports the UK initiated delivery of tanks to Ukraine. The support to Ukraine armed forces cannot be limited. We urge all the nations that can support Ukraine with tanks to do the same. I do hope that tomorrow in Ramstein the needs of fighting Ukrainian armed forces will be met, so they can continue liberating the territories. Thank you.
Polish Minister of Defense Mariusz Błaszczak and new
And Netherlands Defense Minister Kaja Ollongren says the country is also finalizing plans to provide Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine with Germany and the United States, and will announce further military support to Kiev later on today. When asked whether that meant the Netherlands would provide spare parts, missiles, or the actual system, she said the details were still being debated.
The United States and Germany in their projects in providing Patriots to Ukraine. And we're working out the details now. And this group is very strong. And I think it's every time we have shown that we are able together to provide Ukraine with what they need. And what they need right now in this phase of the war, I think it's clear. They need the weapons that are necessary, to push the Russians back from the invaded parts of the country, and they need more air defense, because these air attacks are still going on. We want to have more NATO standard, high, very, very complex but highly capable tanks like the Leopard 2s. And that is the debate that we have to have. And so far, we've always been able, in coordination and cooperation, and in the spirit of unity and support of Ukraine, to find a solution. And I'm really confident that we will find a solution for this as well. And Ramstein, we have seen each other every, I think.
Former Russian president and current vice chairman of its military commission, Dmitry Medvedev, who is close to President Vladimir Putin, has warned NATO that Moscow's defeat in Ukraine could trigger a nuclear war. Mr. Medvedev, who serves, as I've just said, as deputy chairman of the powerful Security Council as well, said in a post on the Telegram messaging app that nuclear powers have never lost major conflicts on which their fate depends. The Kremlin was quick to endorse Mr. Medvedev's remarks, said they were in full accordance with Moscow's principles. Moscow's doctrine allows for a nuclear attack after aggression against the Russian Federation with conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is threatened. Let's talk to security expert Chidi Wado, who joins us virtually from the British capital, London. Good morning to you, Chidi, and Happy New Year, even though we're in the 20th day of it. Can you hear me, Chidi?
I can hear you, yeah. Good morning. Happy New Year. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can. I can now. I want to start off with why is there so much, shall we say, focus on this issue of Leopard 2 tanks? I mean, where you are, Britain has promised several Challenger 2 tanks. Other countries have promised that they'll send defense systems and so on. But it seems that there's a certain fixation over this Leopard 2 tanks. What is so special about these tanks?
Well, the most important, the biggest thing that makes the Leopard 2 the topic of the day is that there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them in lots of countries, and what that means is there's a lot of places where you can train people to use Leopard tanks. I mean, sorry, the first and most obvious thing is because there's a lot of them, there's a lot that can be given away. There's countries that are getting rid of them, changing to more modern tanks or upgrading them. So there's a lot you can give away. The second element is that there's a lot of places, therefore, that you can train them, train soldiers to use them, and also there's a lot of places you can get spare parts. So it's the commonality of the Leopard 2 tank as well as its quality that makes it, the tank of the day, as it were. And then, the other element is that while it's an advanced tank, it's also fairly simple in the parlance of modern tanks. So it's not as complicated as the Challenger 2 or as which is actually quite an old tank, or the M1 Abrams, which is a very complicated tank. It's easy to operate, but difficult to maintain. So it comes back to something that we've kind of mentioned in these discussions, quite a bit, which is logistics, which is very, it's one thing to buy a weapon system and then use it and have it all there looking shiny. It's another thing to keep it on the road, keep it going, and the maintenance is the big issue. So it was the same thing, when we're talking about the Patriots. Yep, you can learn how to use it quite quickly, but maintaining it is a long, difficult process. So the Leopard 2 being, a ubiquitous, plentiful tank, is ideal in this situation. It's got multiple logistics chains. It's fairly easy to learn how to use and to maintain, and it's a good quality tank. So the sticking point is obviously German reluctance for it to be deployed. But that, again, is a little bit of a diplomatic, merry-go-round, and I'm fairly sure there will be a resolution out of Ramstein.
Now, there's a question of synergy in all of this, and you just alluded to it where you talked about training and the logistics. Different people are sending different weapon systems and armaments to Ukraine, and therefore there is, of course, the question of training the Ukrainian soldiers on how to use them, and as you pointed out, maintaining them. Now, is there not a fear that too many of these systems from too many different countries could also create a problem for the Ukrainians themselves? They'll be grateful to receive all this help from wherever they may get it, but how much of an effective tool can it then become if you've got too many from too many different places?
Well, see, that's a brilliant question, because this is a problem that actually the Nigerian army has. We buy weapons from everybody, you know, in every different quantity. So we've got about 4 or 5 different tanks. We've got Vickers, VT4, T55, T72. Again, exactly the problem that you're alluding to. It's a nightmare of logistics, a nightmare of training, a nightmare of maintenance. So 100% correct. Most militaries try and standardize on a single platform. So Britain, before, when it had a serious defense policy, used to maintain that their smaller armored vehicles, the Scimitars, Stormers, Scorpions, they were all based on the same platform. So maintenance was very easy, training was very easy. You learn on one platform, you can work on all of the platforms. Same with our weapon. We use one rifle, the SA-80. Not a great rifle, but it's a rifle. Every military service here in the UK uses that same rifle. So that standardization means that training, maintenance, logistics are quite easy. In the Ukrainian case, beggars cannot be choosers. They need weapons, and they need them in a vast quantity. So at this point, there is a nightmare of logistics. And when this war is finished, many books will be written about the great battles, but the most important book that I'm waiting for is the book about the logistics, how they get the weapons there, how they're maintaining them, because there's a logistics cell somewhere who are going bold and crazy and drinking lots of coffee, because this is a nightmare. But the Ukrainians have no choice. They need these weapon systems, not necessarily now. They need them to be able to continue to maintain the momentum of their offensives when we get to the summer. They have enough equipment for whatever they're planning for spring. And I think if we're looking at it, in terms of the weather is not helping them, because it's not as cold as maybe we expected. So the ground isn't hard enough to support maneuver operations. But come spring, all these troops that are being trained in the UK, in Greece, in Spain, in America, they're going to need these heavy weapons. And as I alluded to previously, in our previous conversation, when you look at the packages that are being provided, you can understand the trajectory of the war. What we're talking about now are tanks, armored fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery. These are all offensive weapons. You will build a combined arms maneuver brigade around these weapon systems. So we've got the infantry and other troops being trained, all over NATO countries, and you've got these weapons being provided. It tells you clearly that come summer or autumn, we're looking at a very powerful Ukrainian offensive. So that timeline is quite clear, to everybody, to us and to the Russians. So from that perspective, the Ukrainians don't really have a choice of being picky and saying we only want T-72s or we only want Leopards. Anything you give them, they're going to take. And then they'll worry about, kind of standardizing everything after the war.
Of course, there is this big meeting taking place at the Ramstein Air Base in Germany, involving, as we're told, about 50 countries. And those 50 countries are bringing different things to the table. What do you expect from that meeting? Of course, we must remember that the Ramstein Air Base is a U.S. air base, even though it's based in Germany. It was set up right after World War II, when that part of what was then known as Nazi Germany was taken over by the Americans, the Western Allies, of course. But what are you expecting? Yet again, they're gathering there, this time in support of Ukraine.
So there will be more pledges of weapons. You've already seen everyone setting the stage. The British have set the stage by, donating these Challenger 2 tanks, which, is a nice gesture for the Ukrainians, but it also says quite a bit about the British state of the British military, that, by donating those weapons, we've actually reduced our own defense capabilities quite significantly, because we don't have that many tanks, and the ones that we do have are not that well maintained. The Americans are donating Bradley fighting vehicles, which are actually very awesome platforms. They're tank-killing platforms. They're fast. They're quite well protected, and used properly will be very, very problematic for the Russians if they're used properly, which is high mobility kind of warfare. The Estonians, as you said in your earlier piece, are donating a lot of equipment, almost 1% of their GDP. Again, this is a strategic move. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. If the Russians, succeed in Ukraine, they're next. They know this. Everyone knows this. So for them, defeating the Russians or destroying as much of Russia's military in Ukraine as they can will save them from what's happening in Ukraine. They don't have the big depth that Ukraine has, to absorb Russian forces. Once the Russians come in, they're there. And we can all see the amount of destruction that's taking place in Ukraine. For them, that will be existential. That will be the end of their country. So this is a strategic move for them. And then all the other countries, Turkey, Greece, everybody has a reason to kind of either support Ukraine or try and use this as a way to get, something out of them. For the Turks, they're trying to, get concessions from the Swedes and from the Finns. The US obviously wants to continue supporting Ukraine to the maximum. And the Germans have now thrown in their wild card of the US has to donate tanks, and then they'll donate tanks or give permission for others to donate tanks. And then there's the problem of the final problem, is that the Polish, who are very hawkish, and they're also going through an election. So if you understand Polish politics or Eastern European politics, there's two great enemies, Germany and Russia. So if you're being hostile to any of them, you're on the positive side of the general public. But in the case of Poland, they're hostile to Russia, and they're now using Germany as their whipping boy, saying this to Germans that won't let us donate our Leopard tanks. The Poles are very keen to donate these Leopard tanks, and they're saying they'll donate them without German permission, which will be a violation of arms control treaties, which then creates more multiplier problems. So as I said at the beginning, this is what you're seeing is just a massive diplomatic merry-go-round. Right now, people are speaking to each other in private. There's going to be a lot of conversations, and hopefully a deal will be made in private, and then some kind of a formula will be given out in public. But the big takeaway from this is that Ukraine is going to get tanks. Ukraine is going to get armored fighting vehicles, a lot more support, and a lot more ammunition. The key things that are not being spoken about is the production capabilities of the Western defense companies. Can they sustain this level of production to keep the Ukrainians fighting throughout this year, and also restock Western armories that have been sent over to Ukraine?
Now, I'm happy you mentioned that towards the end of your statement, because I was going to now look at that on the side of the Russians. We have seen the Russian president visiting weapons factories, areas where they're developing new hardware and so on. And of course, we were all witnesses to that very public spat that took place between him and the trade and industry minister, who he was very unhappy with because he wasn't happy at the pace of production, which speaks to what you talked about just now. How capable are you of replenishing stocks when they go down? In the case of Russia, it's a bit complicated because Russia doesn't have as many people willing to supply it with arms as Ukraine is at the moment. But it does have one or two very big suppliers, mainly China. And China is willing and has been, even though not publicly, in support of Russia. The likes of Iran have also supplied Russia with equipment, and then you never know, North Korea. So I asked the question from you: what the Russians have that the Western allies and Kiev have to be very wary of outside of nuclear weapons?
So it's again, not really good question. The Russian military capabilities are vast. I think I'm not sure if I said this in this interview or somewhere else. When you look at the way the Russian military is structured on paper, their capabilities on paper, they are a very capable force. Where the Russians have failed is in their training and their application of their own doctrine. They've essentially not followed it, and their troops are very badly trained and very badly led. But to answer the question directly, what you would fear from Russia is essentially, other than nuclear weapons, is what we've already seen. We've seen, their ability to, conduct strikes against critical national infrastructure. Essentially, there is as we've spoken about before, there is a military reason why they're conducting these strikes, but the main reason is to terrorize the population. So they can cause a lot of destruction. We can see that in Mariupol. We can see that in all the cities they've captured. In Soledar, they can cause a lot of destruction. Their artillery is the most feared weapon. And the ability to deploy it and concentrate it and use it just to bludgeon their way through. So destroying everything in their path, and then wandering with their infantry and their armor. They've got a lot of tanks, but as we've seen, the tanks are quite vulnerable. Their tanks aren't being used, with their infantry in a good combined arms way. So they can be taken out. But I would say, personally, the biggest fear that one would have with the Russians is their indirect fire capabilities. And when you talk about that, that goes back to your other question about how do they restock. Well, they do have the capability to keep producing shells. Shells are generally low tech. Where their struggle is the high-tech stuff. So you can see they're renovating their T-62s rather than their T-72s. Why? Because the T-72s are a more modern tank. They've got lots of, computerized sensors, fire control systems, things that they need to essentially import from abroad, and they can't because they're now under sanctions. The T-62 is a very simple, basic, tank. It's just, just an iron box. So they can renovate that, they can bring that into service, but it's not going to be as capable as the other tanks. When you're thinking about who's going to supply them, they've got lots of nominal allies, be it not, as you said, North Korea, Iran, maybe Venezuela, maybe Cuba, who could sell them back weapons that they've sold them. But all of these countries are militarized for a reason, because they're either terrified of their own population or of their neighbors. So demilitarizing themselves to support Russia will be, a bit of a strategic error. China, again, as you've mentioned, is not going to take sides in this war. China is a fairly clever country, and they understand that the West is their biggest customer. In as much as sanctions against China would be devastating for the West, it would also be devastating for China. So that kind of trade war, especially now when they're dealing with the fallout from COVID and they're trying to look at Taiwan, with their corner eye, it's not what they really want. They're going to be neutral. I believe they will remain neutral. There's no way they're going to jump in with big weapon supplies. The Russians have asked them already. And they, even just to supply MREs or trucks or whatever it is, they've kind of stood back. So I think China is not really a consideration. Iran has nothing to lose. They're already a pariah state. And for them, this is perfect. They're annoying the West, which is, always good for them. And they're testing a lot of their weapons. They're demonstrating how capable their weapons are. So all their enemies, be it the Gulf states or the Israelis, are able to see Iranian weapons, how well they perform, and understand that, Iran is not going to be a walkover. So Russia is generally isolated. In summary, Russia is generally isolated. Everything they have a good defense industry, but what you're going to see is they're going to get the technology levels that they'll be able to deploy are going to be lower and lower and lower, because most of the high-tech stuff comes from abroad, and it will cost a lot of money to bust sanctions to bring in the amount of weaponry that they need in quantities. And the final point is they also need to keep something back. They need to keep some of their high-tech weaponry back. Their T-90s, T-72s, T-80s, all of those weapons, they need to keep something back in case a war with NATO does come, as they keep claiming. Because if they don't have all of that, they're going to be defeated much more easily than they would be.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Chidi Warner, as usual, for your precise analysis on these matters. It's very enlightening. Thank you so much, and have yourself a pleasant day ahead.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel says the United States is looking into the matter of reports that Russia has opened a criminal case against a United States citizen on suspicion of espionage. Mr. Patel said Russia does not generally abide by obligations to provide timely notification of the detention of U.S. citizens in Russia, adding that Washington would continue to monitor the situation.
Higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. We are aware of these unconfirmed reports of an investigation regarding a U.S. citizen. Unconfirmed reports of an investigation regarding a U.S. citizen in Russia. Generally, the Russian Federation does not abide by its obligations to provide timely notification of the detention of U.S. citizens in Russia. Russian authorities also don't regularly inform the embassy of the trials, sentencing, or movement of U.S. citizens. We're looking into this matter and will continue to monitor. The embassy in Moscow continues to engage with Russian authorities to ensure timely consular notifications and access to all U.S. citizens.
And the Swedish government has announced a new package of military aid to Ukraine that will include armored infantry fighting vehicles and the Archer artillery system. The package is worth 4.3 billion Swedish crowns, and that's about $419 million, and will also include light, portable, NLAW anti-tank weapons, mine-clearing equipment, and assault rifles. Sweden will send about 50 of its tracked and armored Type 90 infantry fighting vehicles as well. It can be used to transport up to 8 infantry soldiers and is equipped with a 40mm automatic cannon. Let's talk now to Boniface Chizie, economic and business development consultant. He joins us virtually from the nation's commercial capital. Good morning to you, and thank you for your time. Happy New Year.
Laddie, how are you? Long time. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
I want to, of course, when we have people like you, we want to take a look at costs here and economic cases. And in this particular instance, this war is now approaching its 11th month. We didn't think it would come this far, but it has. In terms of all the billions that we're hearing going as aid and so on, the world economy is on the edge of recession. Our business desk here advises me to, look at it from the viewpoint that even though the central bankers are heaving a sigh of relief in many countries because, inflation is cooling, it's not yet time to sing hallelujah. What's your view?
Well, I think that the prognoses are not too cheering. It might be premature, for us to begin to celebrate. I mean, the projection is that 1/3 of the countries of the world will go into recession this year, and it's not just going into recession. Even the rest, including Nigeria, I think that we're thankful that we've been told that maybe we've had our own recession, but then there'll be a slowdown. So if you look at all the GDP projections and so on and so forth, they've all been reduced. Take Nigeria, for instance. We are at some point in time it was 3.6. There is now 3.4. Now it's about 3, and so on. And things about projections. Sometimes you don't carry. So, and of course, we take Nigeria, where we have a population growth rate of about 3%. So you need to grow, like 6-7% for that to begin to impact in a meaningful way on the livelihood of your population. So I think that's it's not uhuru yet, from where I stand.
Now, if you take a look at Africa, Africa's position was already delicate even before all these crises emerged on the scene. I mean, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. We were just coming out of the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are those who said we have not come out of it yet. We're still going through it. And then now this war in Ukraine occurred. In terms of our own economies on the continent, particularly as it attains to food security and a couple of other things, we are at the periphery of international economic activity. But then that should also mean perhaps that the impact on us should be quite limited, shouldn't it?
Well, I think that's like rightly observed. We already at the receiving end, before this started happening. If you look at the rate of inflation in Nigeria, it's about over 20%. We're talking of 21%. The average rate of inflation amongst developing and emerging countries of the world is about 10.8. In the world, it's about 8.8%. So I think that if you look at it, rate of inflation is elevated in our country. And of course, inflation is not good news because it pushes so many people into the poverty bracket. So I think that it's not been uhuru, and we are challenged, particularly with the debt situation of most African countries. And so if you, for instance, follow the conversation at Davos, the World Bank chief was trying to make a case that the world itself will have to give a sympathetic ear, to countries of the world that are struggling with the debt situation. You take the situation in Nigeria, where we've been told that the incoming government is going to be faced with a debt stock, a terrible debt stock of about 77 trillion naira. So I think that it's not a very pleasant scenario.
Let's look at our own situation here in Nigeria. That we were already facing significant economic headwinds, as I said before all of this, and as you've just referenced, the debt profile that the incoming government will be inheriting. Let's not go into the reasons why that debt was acquired on this conversation. Is going to be huge. But to even sustain that debt, given the fact that the countries that are probably owed this money are also the same countries that are in economic difficulty as a result of the problem in Ukraine. How much of a sympathetic air can we get, considering that not too long ago there was the debt forgiveness program that involved the Paris Club of Creditors in particular, and then of course the London Club of Creditors?
Well, I think that the world at large, the countries out there that we're in relations with, they have to give us an sympathetic and understanding here. This is very important. Already we started doing it, and the president has pushed to the Senate, it's asked for the ways and means. It has amounted to about 23-point-something trillion naira. It's something that has been accumulated over a 7-year duration for that to be restructured. So he wants to take it to the market and securitize it over a 40-year period at 9% rate of interest. And so that's if you did that, then that will be taken off the debt stock. And so that will be the way to go. We'll have to go and negotiate, these debts. If we don't do that, then we'll have some problems on our hands, bigger problems than we have today. It will mean that it will be increasingly difficult for us, to access a new debt. And then even if we try to do that, the coupon rate is going to be much unfriendly. And so if we're going to, one of the things, the new government that's going to come, and all the expectations, hopeful expectations we have of it, is that they will have to make sure that certain key decisions are taken quickly. I mean, for instance, you can't keep subsidy. That's already, the subsidy is non-existent. We don't know who gets it. If you go out there and you have the queues, and then people are buying fuel at 300 naira a liter, and then why are you keeping the subsidy? I'm talking of subsidy of 3-point-something trillion over half a year duration. And so we don't know what's happening. So I think that there are certain physical decisions that we have to take that will have to give us a leeway. Well, praying that, the expectations we have for election 2023, that it will be carried. If it's carried, I would expect that we'll be able to move quickly. We expect that the new government will come and will be able to leverage on its goodwill and will be given some concessions. That will be the only saving grace.
This decisions you talk about, that for example, that you gave the example of the subsidy removal and so on, quite a number of those decisions had been avoided by the current government and past governments because they're very painful decisions that will impact significantly on the populace. And only a government that has the will, as they say in Nigeria, can take this on. Now, regardless of who it is that is coming after May of 2023, do you think, how much of an absorptive capacity do you think the populace has, the productive base has, the labor force has, for some of these changes, even though many people will agree with you that they're inevitable, but how much of an absorptive capacity do you think we have for these kind of changes at this point?
Well, Ladi, I would expect that the absorptive capacity has been stretched to its elastic limit amongst the population. But really what we expect that with the new government, we all have hopeful expectations. The new government will come with goodwill, and that things will be done differently. I mean, one of the things that is common knowledge amongst us is the fact that the quantum of products we are told that we consume, it's not, we can't see it, it does not relate to what some of us would expect. And so because there's so much malpractice, so much being taken across the borders, and so you find that what I'm saying is that the situation might not be as bad as it is, but because it's the corruption infested and the whole thing is exaggerated and so on and so forth, because the people have not come with the sort of values we expect them to come to the table. And so when you have massive corruption like that, then you have consequences and you have results on ground, which will not probably be true. And so we expect that if the new government comes and then it meets our expectations, we expect that we'll be on a home run. That's the expectation.
Now, my final question to you, Dr. Chizia, is this. If you look at our own situation, one of the things that the war in Ukraine brought to the fore is how dependent we are on, as you just pointed out, imports from countries that most Nigerians are not even aware of. Before February last year, other than the medical students who were going there to train as doctors, most Nigerians had never heard of Ukraine. But then suddenly the price of noodles, pasta, soy, oil, and so on all hit the roof, and everybody was blaming the war in Ukraine. we're quite vulnerable as an economy to shocks like this, external shocks, I believe they are called. But we have done nothing since this war started to cushion against other shocks that may be coming.
Well, I think that's I think we'll have a tough skin, so to say. That you know, we have shock absorbers who will carry on. If you look at this government and see the way they've carried on, you wouldn't believe that there's any crisis anywhere. And so it's like this, you know, this is like a fairy tale, you know, that people are talking about. So the crisis is there, will go on, and that's why you have ways and means, you know, how did you manage over the 7-year period? You know, we just went to the central bank and we printed money. And so we just carried on, and they allowed the rate of inflation to go through the roof. And so people got money on their hands, and then so as compared to salaries not being paid, people got monies, and of course the value of that money, you know, was going southwards, and so that's that illusion. But I think that. Shock absorber, like I said earlier on, we're all being stretched. You take the power sector, you take whatever sector you want to look at today. You know, the average Nigerian is at the receiving end. But you know, there are a few highlights, things that could happen this year if Dangote refinery comes to stream, and then that could be a massive game changer. We've been waiting for some time. We just commissioned Deep Blue Seaport. So there are a few things happening in this country. If, for instance, we can get the refineries revamped and they begin to contribute to, you know, whatever consumption rate volumes we have, again, that also would impact the situation. So I would expect that what one expects, the situation would get better, more so if we get election 2023 correct.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Dr. Boniface, as usual, for your contribution and your analysis this morning. Do have yourself a pleasant weekend ahead.
Thank you, Ladi, for having me. God bless you.
Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Pentagon has, in fact, announced a $2.5 billion Ukraine security package, including for the first time Striker armored vehicles and more Bradley fighting vehicles that could be used against any potential Russian offensive in Ukraine this spring. The package, publicized the day before an international coalition meets in Germany to discuss more aid to Ukraine, is the second largest ever announced by the United States. The U.S. has now committed $26.7 billion to Ukraine in security aid since the beginning of the war nearly a year ago. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams of our business desk this Friday. Laddie, $26.7 billion, that's a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
I can think of 100 things that money could go to.
A lot.
A lot of money. Now, the euro area currency account balances come back up to positive territory. What does this mean?
So basically, after about 8 months of having a deficit, that the current account is the difference between the money that inflows, of funds into the country and outflows. So that difference can either be a deficit or a surplus. That's when you have maybe too much money going out and little coming in.
Right.
So they've had a lot, going out in that 8 months, which led to a deficit in the Eurozone. But now we finally have a surplus, which is good for the economy. The reason why they had that 8 months deficit was because of the, rising energy costs. So all of that, they had to pay more for their energy imports. But now with this, the good thing is with a surplus now, they can use some of those funds to invest in, other countries or buy other, assets, to build wealth, in other countries for, their economy. Right. So it's a good sign, for the Eurozone.
Now, Russia is including the Egyptian pound on its list of tradable currencies.
Yeah.
I mean, this is following what you and I discussed on Wednesday and on Tuesday.
Yeah, the great de-dollarization. So they're adding more, friendly currencies at this time. And, the next one now is the Egyptian pound, and which is, it's good for the Egyptian economy because that means, because the Egyptian pound has been through a lot, in 2022, talking about devaluation, against the US dollar. So it's a good sign, but at the end of the day, we know why Russia is doing this. They're adding as much, friendly currencies as they can into the exchange. So this has raised the amount of currencies there about 43. So the trading pairs are increasing, against the ruble, but, towards friendlier nation. So the new entrant is the Egyptian pound.
How are the markets doing this last day of the week?
Yeah, so it's been a topsy-turvy, week. But right now, gold is taking the shine, and even
the Russians want to get in on gold.
Exactly, it's hit about $1,935, and it looks like $2,000 is in view, at this point, and it's all because of the, weak economic data we're seeing coming out from the U.S. We're also seeing the Fed, hawkish comment, from the Fed. So now investors are piling into
the safe assets,
safe haven, at this time. So 2K is in view. It's incredible. Just September 2022 was trading at $1,600 per ounce, but now we're at $1,009. Was a slow climb, and quiet.
But it's gotten
here we are. And obviously some that want to go in now might be afraid that, oh my God, hope I'm not buying the top.
And then just as I get in, it then heads for the bottom.
Yeah, but it's a sign of things to come. It shows that, investors are afraid of recession, and so they're looking for safe assets at this time.
Indeed. Ladi, thanks so much. Go prepare for your show, you and the team. Thanks.
Thank you.
And finally on the program, how would you like to take a dive into icy water? Well, it's not for leisure, but a tradition that many Ukrainian soldiers serving in Donetsk region practice to mark Orthodox Christian Epiphany. For 34-year-old Ukrainian serviceman Alexander, he's been diving with his family every year. He said, quote, "This time I can't do it with my family. That's why I came alone. I used to always come here with family to dive. We are from Asfirahorsk." He adds that he has been diving for as long as he has been fighting. The serviceman, who has been fighting for 6 years, has also been doing this tradition for that time. Diving into icy water is a traditional Orthodox Christian way of marking Epiphany. Wouldn't really want to be in his shoes. Thanks for being with us this Friday. My name is Ladi Akiri Doluale. Do go out there and have yourselves a pleasant weekend ahead. Good morning.